Welcome to CC, the Classic Car Show. In this episode, we discover some hidden power in this classic English roadster. We test your classic car knowledge in Know Your Chrome. Also on the show, a great way to get yourself a sought-after Cooper. Plus, an unusual Alfa, a very muscly US classic of tomorrow, and some classic racing action. So ease off the throttle, lie back the seat, and switch yourself into cruise control for CC Classic Cars. What could be better than a classic drive through the countryside, with a quick stop at the village green? As locals tend to their gardens, an everyday English roadster cruises down the lane and all is well in this quaint little hamlet. But not everything is quite as it seems. Something isn't right. Are the roses blooming too late this season? Is it Sunday already? Or is it that massive roar from this little MGB? This is an MGB V8 race-modified roadster, the pride and joy of its owner and creator, Andy Morgan.
About 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to drive a friend's car, which was an MGB with a V8 in it. And I was so taken by it that I thought I would like to build one myself, and then deciding what sort of engine you want to put into it. And of course we chose the last version of the Rover V8.
The Rover V8 was very, very popular, starting its life as a Buick V8, an American-designed aluminium V8 that Rover built to the same specifications. It went into many performance cars from the late 60s into the early 80s. Cars like the Triumph TR8, the Morgan Plus 8, and the Rover sedans and coupes of the time. It was quite widely used for UK sport car production. Its great advantage, of course, was that it was a very lightweight and powerful engine, and very suitable for modifications. The engine was completely disassembled and fully balanced with ported heads, roller rockers, extractors and a modified fuel injection system. The drivetrain was replaced with a 5-speed Toyota Supra gearbox and a Ford Fairlane limited slip diff in the rear. The whole suspension geometry has been changed and strengthened to be certified for public road use, as this vehicle was not only to be a road vehicle but something that could compete on the racetrack.
We've taken off the rubber bumper bars because this body is a 1974 body, and it typically out of the factory would have had ugly big black rubber bumper bars. They weigh a lot each, so they came off, and what you see at both ends of the car are fiberglass valances, which tidies up the body but it also lightens it. The car feels like a classic car, absolutely. It rides on the road a lot more roughly than a modern car with modern suspension. So there's absolutely no doubt that after all this expense that I've got a classic car.
MGBs were built in the UK between 1962 and 1980. Originally a convertible roadster, the MGB was also released as a coupe 2+2, although this model struggled to compete with the soft top. The V8 only went into the GT body, The factory was originally going to proceed with the V8 in the Roadster, but unfortunately in 1980 the production of the MGB ceased and the V8 Roadster never happened.
And there's an interesting story behind that, because Costello Engineering in London actually showed them what to do and impressed them so much they decided to build their own factory MGB GT V8. And that's really why I've chosen the Rover V8 for this car, because it's not a foreign body, it's what the factory originally designed to do, except that I've taken the last version, which is fuel injected.
What this car also has going for it is it's a beautiful car that's been fully restored. All of the suspension has been rejigged, rebrushed with modern brushing, and the engine has got an incredible amount of performance. It's got more than 3 times the horsepower than the original car, and according to Andy, performs the way a modern high-powered sports car does. From a handling point of view, on the road, it feels like a classic car, but as soon as you put it on the racetrack, it's as good as any race car you can expect, because a race car is specifically built for the job. This MGB is not so good on modern roads, with its classic suspension, but certainly has the performance and sound to give you a thrill.
I've got exactly the car that I wanted. I'm very pleased with it, and if you ever go through this project, I would always say, don't make it an I wish car at the end. Keep spending money on it until you're perfectly happy with it, because it's your creation and you want to be happy and not look backwards and feel that you should have done something a little bit better had you had another chance. So spend the money and be happy at the end is my recommendation. But yeah, it's a costly thing, but lots and lots of fun and a fabulous car to drive.
Here's a challenge for all you classic car fans. Know Your Chrome gives you a peek at some close-ups of classic chrome. Look at the shapes. Do you recognise the lines? Can you tell which car sports this shiny styling? It's too early for clues, but we can tell you it's a car, it's a classic, and it's very, very cool. Look closely, and we'll give you more hints later in the show. Next on CC, a classic Cooper for the budget conscious. A mean machine that well may be a classic of tomorrow, and a unique Italian with a Canadian name. Mini Coopers are not hard to come by, as there were more than 64,000 Mini Coopers produced. Not bad for a car that had a planned production run of only 2,000. The challenge for fans of the car hoping to snap one up are that the current owners of these famous little runabouts are reluctant to sell. So they've pushed up the value, and the only way to get your hands on one is to pay up to $35,000 US, or £20,000 for a good one. Or get a cheap old clunker and restore it. Here is one of those clunkers. A Morris Mini Cooper looking for some care and attention. It doesn't exactly set the world ablaze with excitement and has seen much better days. This Mini though is an excellent opportunity for a classic car makeover, which is why Paul Elliott, a classic car fan and restorer, has snapped it up for himself.
It's a 1964 and 998 Mini. We wanted a 998 and we wanted one that wasn't rusty and was fairly complete. And pretty much it's much better than the ones we've had in the past, so we decided to go with this one and restore it. To restore this car, we pretty well have to do everything on it. So we're going to look at all of the mechanical components, the engine, the clutch, the gearbox, the braking system. It will need to be repainted, and we'll also do the trim and upholstery as well.
This car was chosen for restoration as although it's well and truly off the road, it has very little rust for its age. mostly just in the driver's side door. The shell of the car is very sound. It's important when choosing a car for restoration that you don't invest in a vehicle that's too far gone. If you can't discern for yourself if a vehicle is too rusty or has had too much accident damage, get some advice. You can easily buy yourself an expensive lump of scrap metal or an unrealistic restoration bill if you're not sure what you're doing. Even in this dilapidated state, the Mini Cooper is valued at around $3,000 or £1,800, much less than a running vehicle, but there is plenty of investment required to get it back on the road. The value of this car is in the fact it's a relatively unmolested vehicle. It still has its original hubcaps, trims, and even though it looks to be missing some of the jewellery, it's in fact here in the trunk for safekeeping. This Cooper also has its original engine, so the whole car still has the same components it rolled out of the factory with. The great thing about restoring a Mini is that they are relatively simple to work on. Parts are a breeze to find, as more than 1 million Minis were produced, and the Cooper and Cooper S models have been appreciating in value for the last 20 years, and will continue to do so, making them a great investment. When we look at a relic like this, we can see why people get so excited about restoring classic cars. As far as a project goes, this little British racing green Mini Cooper is a fantastic opportunity to revive a piece of motoring history, while having some fun too, and it would be a relatively easy restoration job. Parts are easy to find, the car is complete, and it won't take up too much room in your garage. From the mid to late 60s, right through to the 80s, there was a battle going on in the US car industry. Who could build the most desirable pony car or muscle car? Ford were doing well with the Mercury Cougar and the very popular Ford Mustang, while General Motors were pushing ahead with the Chevrolet Camaro and the Pontiac Firebird. The original Firebird, built from 1967 to 1969, did well, but struggled to get close to the Mustang. The updated model, though, produced from 1969 to 1981, forged a new era of rolling muscle and became a true classic in its own right. In the grand tradition of American performance vehicles, the Pontiac Firebird was a powerhouse on the open road, but struggled to hug the corners. Sure, we may be getting out of strictly classic territory here, but this is the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, popularly known as just the Trans Am, and was built in 1980. Although this is an 80s model, the car is essentially the same as the models rolling off the production line in the early 1970s, with a few minor styling changes. A small block Chevrolet 305 V8 power plant, distinct styling and a unique look, even today. If anything, the evolution of the car happened mostly around the chiselled nose of this vehicle, with a change in headlamp shape and a more angular look in its later life. So you could call the Pontiac Trans Am a classic, or a classic of tomorrow. Either way, this piece of American muscle car history is a highly desirable and recognisable vehicle that is already appreciating in value as a classic car, no matter which country you live in. For some, there's nothing better than a day cruising the hills, taking it easy and simply enjoying the beautiful countryside around them. For others, it's the high-speed thrill of the racetrack. For a few, even this is not enough. Not only do some classic and vintage car owners push their vehicles to their limit, but they even do it in unique examples of motoring history that are irreplaceable and sometimes priceless. Take these fine examples of vintage race cars that are still working as hard today as the day they first hit the track, some of them over 70 years ago. First up is a 1934 MG K3 Magnet, and one of only 33 built in an MG factory for racing. This one-off 1948 special is actually based on a standard MGTC that's been heavily modified by its owner throughout its racing career. In 1951, this actual car went on to win a Grand Prix. This is Black Bess, and in its day, this black beauty was a winner of 30 major races, including the Australian Grand Prix in 1950. And between 1946 and 1952, the car was virtually unbeatable. Bess is still going strong half a century later, regularly taking part in track events with the same roar she had over half a century ago, although for now her Grand Prix days are well and truly over. Most classic cars were built for daily commuting and Sunday afternoon jaunts. Many others were built for racing on the track, and what better way to get the most from your investment than to get behind the wheel at classic and vintage race days. So how well did you go with your first peek? How well did you know your chrome? Here's a quick update. Did you guess it right away, or are you still pondering? Take a look at these shots. We're showing you a little more of the car here, so you should be able to pick it. The answer is coming soon. Next on CC Classic Cars, a sporty coupe from the 70s, and we reveal the Know Your Chrome mystery car. Back in 1967, Alfa Romeo was showing cars at the Montreal Expo. The Expo organisers asked the car company if they could show something special, and the Italian car maker didn't disappoint. On the show floor, an unnamed concept car was revealed to the world for the first time. Designed by Marcel Gandini at Bertoni, the vents behind the cabin on the rear pillars gave the impression of a mid-engine supercar. But for unknown reasons, a more traditional mechanical layout was chosen. An exercise in design, the car shown at the Expo wasn't fitted with a performance engine and had only a small 4-cylinder motor fitted, just to move it around.
The concept car wasn't really planned to go into production, but it stimulated so much interest that it was thought that it would be a goer. So then the question was, what do we put in it as a power plant? And the decision was taken to have a detuned version of their Formula One engine, the fuel-injected V8.
The power plant chosen was the 3-litre V8 that was used in the Type 33 racing car. The capacity was detuned to produce a 2.5-litre instead of a 3-litre motor. A 90-degree V8 fuel injection engine, it produced 230 horsepower. Alfa Romeo had high hopes for their first ever V8 powered sports car. The buzz from the Expo had boosted the confidence of the car maker, and they made big plans for the Montreal.
The car is Alfa Romeo's attempt to make a genuine sports car that would compete with other marques. The problem was, the plan was to make 10,000 of these vehicles, but when they were moving into that, they were also trying to set up the Alfa Sud factory. There were difficulties which meant that Alfa was losing money, and as a result the run was finished in only 3,000 of the 10,000 being made.
This particular Montreal has its own unique story. Ian Wall owned a 1973 Alfa Spider and became friends with a man who ran an Alfa workshop. One day this Montreal came in, accident damaged, and the car was in a pretty sorry state. The owner of the Montreal thought the repairs of this car were going to be too difficult and decided to sell it. Ian had the opportunity of buying the car and thought that it was an interesting proposition, considering how unique the model was. So in 1982, he became the owner of a very badly damaged Alfa Romeo Montreal. The task then was to find the parts that were necessary to rebuild this Montreal into a workable vehicle, a search that turned out to be a global quest.
Some of the parts were available from Italy, but some were no longer in the store, and we searched the world. I think the windscreen came from Belgium. There was a section that holds the radiator in behind the front of the car, and I was able to find the front end of a Montreal in Great Britain, and they cut the front end of that and sent it to me, and that completed the bits and pieces that we were looking for.
It took about 3 years to complete the rebuild and restoration, and it was well worth it. The car turns heads wherever it goes. From the time of its restoration, it was used as a daily driver, to work and back every day. Towards the late 80s, Ian realised that at any time his beloved Montreal could be damaged in an accident again, and decided that he should keep his pride and joy for use in club runs and touring, and shouldn't be risking it in everyday traffic.
We've taken this car, my wife and I, all around the countryside. We've had a lot of fun in it. When in the days the Grand Prix was in Adelaide, there were navigation trials. We've been in a couple of rallies, but only in the historic areas, because I didn't want to modify the car.
Interestingly, the Montreal was never sold in Montreal, as the car was only ever released in Europe. With unusual features like the retractable headlight grilles to help with aerodynamics, a sporty 5-speed manual gearbox and ventilated disc brakes, the Montreal was well ahead of its time. But it did have a price tag to match. The list price of the car in 1970 was just over £5,000, or about $8,000. In comparison, at the time a Porsche 911 was selling around $7,000, while the Ferrari Dino or E-Type Jaguar could also be purchased new for about the same investment. Hence, the pickup rate of the car was well below Alfa Romeo's hopes. You can pick up a good condition or restored Montreal now for around $40,000, or around £25,000. Produced from 1970 to 1977, the Alfa Romeo Montreal is remembered for its unique styling, its blistering pace, and the fact that to this day, it's the only V8 Alfa Romeo ever built for the car-buying public.
The Alfa Montreal is actually a much overlooked motor car. It's a very nice car to drive. It has some characteristics that are a little bit unfortunate perhaps, but it talks to you through the steering. It's a very pleasant car with its 5-speed gearbox to drive. It has a very nice exhaust note, and the ladies think it's splendid.
So how well did you know your chrome? If you said it was a 1963 Jaguar E-Type, you'd be right. Built in the UK from 1961 to 1975, the E-Type was inspired by the racing Jaguars that were so successful in the 1950s. Designed by the racing team, the E-Type Jaguar is considered by many to be the most beautiful car ever produced, and we tend to agree. Whether it's an E-Type Jaguar, like the Know Your Chrome mystery car, or something much more obscure. There is such a wide variety of highly desirable classic cars that everyone could own one if they so desired. The trick is just deciding which car to choose. Every country has its own unique selection of yesteryear's motoring history, and we love them all on CC Classic Cars.